everyone, welcome to this week's episode of the Cross-Chain Insider, a weekly roundup of all news traveling across chains, brought to you by LI.Fi. I'm Mark, member of the biz dev team at LI.Fi, and the general top signal for the entire crypto market. My GigaBrain co-host is Arjun, the jack of all trades and master of everything at LI.Fi. He's the thread owner extraordinaire, research owner of protocols, and the occasional member of the sales team. What's up, Arjun?
Hey, I'm so glad we get to do this again.
Yeah. All right. So Arjun writes this as a newsletter that goes out every Monday, and then we pod about it about 12 hours later in audio form, so you don't actually have to read it. So we're just that helpful. So Arjun, can you give us the rundown, the recap, the roundup of what happened in the bridging space this week?
Yeah, let's start with one of our integrated partners, Celer, and their C-Bridge. So Celer, they launched their interchain messaging on mainnet this week. And this is the IM framework. So with this, it's now much easier to build interchain applications. So developers can build applications with the Celer IM SDK. And this allows them to have efficient liquidity utilization, application logic, and everything that comes within SDK. So all the technical aspects, they've been broken down into the SDK, and they're now available as the Celer IM framework. So this basically, it simplifies all the interchain interactions for users of Celer enabled applications. And with the IM, they also there was a DEX that launched with the IM, that was built on the Celer IM. It's called Chain Hop, and yeah, that's also live on mainnet. So additionally, Celer also launched their NFT solution package, which went live on mainnet. And this is also built with Celer's IM framework, and it allows developers to issue NFTs with cross-chain mobility. So these NFTs can be transferred easily between Celer-supported chains. Again, like a big week for Celer, one of our integration partners, and with lots of innovation coming from their team as always. So, yep, great week for them. I think with that, we can move on to Evmos, and they're the EVM hub on Cosmos. So they went live again last week, relaunching after their network halt on the original launch date. And users can now bridge to Evmos using Nomad and Connext. So Nomad is the official canonical bridge of Evmos, and it allows users to bridge stablecoins and wrapped ETH, wrapped BTC to Evmos. And additionally, Connext also added support for them last week. So what Connext allows them is any user from any EVM chain can basically bridge to Evmos. Because we have these bridges integrated, I think in the future soon, LI.Fi will also have support for Evmos.
Did you get the rect drop?
In one of my wallets, I didn't check the others.
Me too. It's my homework this week to go check if I actually got it.
Yeah, moving on, let's move on to Hashflow. So Hashflow is a bridgeless cross-chain swap protocol, and they just went live last week. They've been built with Layer 0, a cross-chain messaging protocol. And so Hashflow, they describe themselves as a decentralized exchange. And I think this is becoming a common theme now. Like DEXs they're adding functionality for bridging, and they're becoming like cross-chain DEXs. So this is great, and also something that LI.Fi offers from day one, I would say, because we have bridges, we have DEXs, and we have DEX aggregators, all of them integrated into one product. So we're able to offer such cross-chain any-to-any swaps. So for Hashflow users, they can now swap assets on Ethereum, Avalanche, BNB chain, Arbitrum, and Polygon. And moving on to the last bit about the other partners. So Binance Bridge 2.0 is now live. So Binance, a centralized, highly trusted bridge controlled by the Binance team. They launched 2.0 this week, which currently supports 9 token. So ultimately, the goal is to support bridging of like all the listed assets on Binance, the exchange, and select unlisted assets. And finally, we can move on to something that LI.Fi is specifically excited about, and that's the Klima cross-chain staking. So, Mark, do you want to let us know what this is all about?
Yeah, so LI.FI is very excited about this little partnership we had with EtherSpot, where we essentially came up with a way that users can stake to Klima DAO from another chain. So let's say you have wrapped Ethereum on Gnosis, and you want to stake that onto the Klima platform, which is on Polygon. That used to be a transaction we counted that would take about 9 different clicks and maybe 4 different dApps. So right, you'd have to go to a decentralized exchange to swap your wrapped ETH to whatever token. And then you're gonna have to bridge that token over to Polygon. Then you're gonna have to stake on Klima. And throughout this whole time, you're having to go to your MetaMask and switch networks. And it's just this mess of a user experience. We, along with EtherSpot, have just kind of built out this product where everything is happening, the swap, the bridge, the stake, all in one user interface. And it kind of looks just like this on the place. I mean, look how clean that is. I mean, if you were a newbie to the crypto space, you'd be like, oh, I have an asset on Gnosis and I want to stake it on, Polygon. This is super easy. I just click this button. Whereas like, for us OGs, this would have taken like 3 hours of research and like 4 failed transactions and a lot of frustration. So I think this is the future of cross-chain transactions, right? Where you don't even really realize where your assets are coming from, where they're going. All you want to do is do the cool stuff on chain.
Yeah, I mean, this is great because it like drastically improves the onboarding experience, I would say. So the Klima DAO, especially for like non-Polygon users, even if they knew exactly what they want to do, which is kind of rare, like you don't know from the get-go what you want to do. Even if they know all this, they have to perform 9 interactions, and that's very complex, right? There's just so much scope for mistakes. So what this does is it like breaks it down into one product, one interface, 5 minutes, and you can just take on Klima from basically any chain.
Yeah, and just to maybe go into it at a little bit more of a technical level, it's actually pretty cool. So EtherSpot is an SDK, which for those of you who have a life don't know what an SDK is, software development kit. And it's just like a smart contract. So EtherSpot allows you to essentially like batch cross-chain transactions into a smart contract. And it's really, really, really cool. Do you have anything to add there, Arjun?
Yeah, I mean, again, like it's all about abstraction, right? So like basically all the steps that were there, like there were 2 different SDKs, different products. KlimaDAO is a separate thing on Polygon, and now it's like all into one SDK that can be deployed on basically any application. So it's great for others as well because there are so many other use cases that open up with this, right?
Yeah, I'm excited to see what we come up with next at LI.FI. I think there could be some cool use cases for stuff like this. Okay, moving on. So that was kind of like the bridging section of the newsletter. And we will now move on to the kind of cross-chain overview. And the first point of news in the cross-chain space is that Maple Finance is now live on Solana, which I think is going to be pretty big. Maple is kind of an institutional DeFi product, and it has $75 million in TVL on Ethereum. And, on Ethereum, that's not massive. But if you're coming over to Solana, $75 million in TVL is pretty big. So I'm excited to see what capabilities Solana unlocks for Maple, just because institutional DeFi probably needs high throughput and low transaction fees. So Maple Finance on Solana, that's just another kind of big time DeFi protocol that's moving across chains. And this is pretty interesting because usually you see something like Maple go from Ethereum to an EVM compatible, but we're going all the way over to Solana. So pretty cool.
It's nice to see the ticker change as well on Twitter. Like it says Maple, Solana, and Ethereum now.
I know. Look at that. Look, I mean, that's just, there's some synergy there. You know, we don't all have to be maxis. We can just live in a great big cross-chain world. Next piece of news is that Stader on Fantom, their liquid staking solution, SFTMX, just went live. And a liquid staking solution essentially means that you can stake an asset, you get a derivative of that asset, and then you can use that derivative in DeFi protocol. So you can pretty much leverage the asset that you're staking. You know, Lido has been very famous at allowing people to stake their ETH and then use their staked ETH to do other DeFi things. This is pretty similar. I think people would be pretty excited about this, though Fantom did have a tough week. So sad for Fantom this week. Moving on, something I'm pretty excited about is Optimism, the layer 2 for Ethereum, launched a governance token called OP, which I do believe Arjun might have been an airdrop recipient, maybe, just because he used cross-chain bridges. So if anyone's listening and they're like, oh my gosh, how do I get the next airdrop? Maybe you should go to Li.Fi and just bridge places, because it's pretty easy to get airdrop these days. Arjun, do you have any thoughts on the Optimism airdrop?
First thing is that it is easier to get airdrops because there are so many bridges out there. And like the first thing is like you have to bridge to all these ecosystems, right? So you not only do you airdrop farm a bridge first, you can go and like check out all the different applications. And I think the key to getting any airdrop like is not to plan for it, but it's to use applications on that ecosystem or that platform. So basically use whatever application you like, bridge you like, and just if there's a token, there's a high chance that you will get get an airdrop. And on the Optimism airdrop, it's like interesting to see their approach because they've divided into two houses, and it's not just one airdrop, and you know it's like it's going to be a recurring airdrop which rewards activity even after the airdrop is done. So that's an interesting way to incentivize user activity even after the airdrop is done and dusted, because usually you've seen that okay, people airdrop farm and then they just abandon the ecosystem or the application. But in this case, there's like enough incentive for everyone to keep using different applications. But I don't know about the different levels based on which they've like distributed the tokens. And like how if you've like qualified for 3 different levels, you get so many more tokens. So that's kind of like you can discuss that, but again, there's no right or wrong way to do this. And it's like it's good to see that they've taken a different approach and not just airdropped a token. They've taken a thoughtful approach to this.
Yeah, so just some alpha out there for you guys. There's still 14% of their entire token supply reserved for future airdrops. So if you haven't bridged over to Optimism, maybe you should do so. Arjun, what's the best way that they can bridge over to Optimism?
I mean, just use Li.Fi, right? You'll get all the different bridge routes and just choose the best one.
Yeah, and the thing is you don't even have to like know what bridge you need to use. You literally can just go to our website and be like, you can click Optimism and like will magically take you there. It's beautiful. Second thing about the Optimism airdrop, then I'll move on because we've already talked about Optimism for too long, is that so they split their kind of like governance of the optimistic collective, or whatever they're calling it, into the token governance by OP, which is their token, and then they're also having what they're calling the Citizens House, which is going to be governed by soulbound NFT holders, which are going to very active community members. And a soulbound NFT is an NFT that you get and you cannot trade. Like you can't get rid of it. Like it's stuck in your wallet forever. And I just find that a fascinating way to kind of split up the governance of a token, because it allows like non-whales or non-OGs of a protocol to come in and be able to make actual decisions. So it's very interesting. Moving on. is, oh, yes. So the Uniswap, there's a proposal by the Celo team to port Uniswap over to their chain. I believe it now has 50 million votes. And I'm not sure if that's the final proposal, because there's like 3 stacks of proposal levels on Uniswap. But I'm definitely keeping an eye out on this. Uniswap is now all over the place and is expanding like crazy. So I will definitely not be surprised if this ends up getting passed. And I think they got like 50 million votes to like 1,000 saying no. So
Yeah.
it seems like this is gonna go through. Moving on is, oh, I think that might be the last portion of that section. Actually, I was getting ahead of myself. Let's stay on track then. Arjun is definitely the best threader at LI.FI. And this week, he threaded extensively about a reason to be optimistic. That's not the optimistic airdrop. Arjun, this weekend was pretty terrible. How can you be so optimistic after this weekend?
I mean, yeah, so it was a crazy weekend, right? Like we were talking about this, there was so much bad news basically from everywhere. Like the Rari and saddle finance exploits. There was Solana that was down for like 7 hours. Ethereum was congested because of Yuga Lab land drops. And overall, I think it's fair to say that it was a pretty bad weekend. But there was one very good thing that stood out, and it's the failed Rainbow Bridge attack, which makes me really optimistic, pun intended. And I think and that just makes me optimistic about the future of bridges and security in general. And before we talk about like in detail about what happened exactly, we should know that the Rainbow Bridge, like against the common notion that it's a light client based bridge on both ways from Ethereum to near, but in reality, it's a light client bridge going to near and an optimistic bridge going to Ethereum. So this is a common mistake that people make, that okay, the Rainbow Bridge is a light client bridge, but it's different in different directions, right? So the optimistic bridge going to Ethereum is key here, because the attack failed because of how optimistic bridges work in general. So in such bridges, there are independent parties that watch over the network activities. So these are responsible for monitoring the transactions and challenging them in case they're wrong. And so when the attacker deployed a contract and tried to become a valid Rainbow Bridge relayer, so and then he tried to send light client blocks. One of the bridge watchdogs figured out that the transaction is fraudulent, and he basically challenged it. And interestingly, because anyone can become a watchdog on the Rainbow Bridge because it's permissionless, an MEV bot that of course doesn't care about security and only cares about profit saw this transaction and front ran the watchdog basically to gain the 2.5 ETH in profit. And of course, the bot's transaction succeeded. But the main thing is that the attack failed, and the attacker, instead of like gaining anything, he lost 2.5 ETH, which was paid to the MEV bot. And in the future, I think the Rainbow team will come with like stronger incentives for the watchdogs, because otherwise, every time the MEV bot could just front run them and take all the profit. So this would make it less profitable for them to play the role of a watchdog in the system. But this is a great example of how an optimistic bridge can prevent such attacks, and it's just nice to see bridge security measures working successfully in practice and not just in theory, right? Like till now we've been talking about, okay, optimistic bridge, they have these watchdogs that can look over the activity and then basically say that, oh, this is wrong. But now to actually see this in practice and actually succeed in stopping an attack, it's just great.
Yeah, and by my understanding, it really only takes one watcher.
Yeah.
To point out the fraudulent activity, and you're good to go, which is like kind of really cool when you think about it. Like,
so what stands out here is that, like, in general, bridges, they try to secure against attacks, right? So it's like you have all these security measures that stop the attack from happening at all. But optimistic bridges are different because they let the attack happen and then they like rug the attacker basically. Then they're like, okay, we saw the attack, we saw that this is a wrong transaction, so you can't go through. And it just takes one watcher in the system to make it all work. But there are some trust assumptions to the watcher, like at least one needs to be active at all times. But yeah, I think it's a good different security design.
Yep. So I mean, yeah, and it's decentralized because anyone can essentially be a watchdog, if I am correct, right?
Yeah, so that's why the MEV bot was able to become a watcher as well.
Gosh, the details of all this cross-chain stuff just so fascinating. Okay, so moving on, we're going to go to the next section of the pod, which is when we do kind of recommended reads and recommended listens. This week is a little bit special for us because, you know, Arjun just posted his like major research piece that he's been doing for like, what, 6 weeks?
Yeah, I mean, you've been editing for longer, but yeah, like the 6 weeks.
Yeah, 6 weeks. I was his editor. He was the gig of brain. It was wonderful. The topic of the essay, which I kind of hope we can talk about for, you know, maybe 2 or 3 minutes here, is that with bridges, trust is a spectrum. So what does that mean to you, that title, Arjun?
I mean, it just means that you can't say that, okay, one solution is trusted and then the other side is trustless, right? So everything kind of falls in between, like somewhere in between. It's like the same question, like how decentralized is decentralized enough? So it's like how many, like how much do I need to reduce the trust in the system to make it trustless actually? And it's also like the blog provides a definition of what trustless means theoretically. So that's also kind of interesting because till now we had been using the term without actually knowing like where it came from or like how you can actually define it. So it was a great piece to work on because it answered so many questions for us as well.
Yeah, and this research piece kind of came about because Arjun and I were reading just so many pieces of documentation that threw around the term trustless and trusted. And we were like, what does this even mean? And you know, the whole root of this idea is the fact that, you know, the root of cryptography and Bitcoin and everything we're doing here is that, you know, Alice needed to send Bob, let's say, a Bitcoin, right? And how do you do that without asking a bank to facilitate that transaction? And now Alice and Bob have grown up, right? Alice and Bob are now whole blockchains. Now we have blockchain A, blockchain B, trying to have tokens go between each other. And so
Alice and Bob have now grown up and they've started traveling to different blockchains. So that's the problem now. Like, how do you make them communicate even if they're on like different blockchains?
Exactly. And so this article goes into all the different ways that people are building systems to have these blockchains communicate with each other. So, you know, we have validator set. We talk about validator sets. We talk about optimistic ways that you can bridge. I mean, what else do we talk about? I mean,
there's like liquidity networks. There's light client based bridges, and there's also ZK bridges, which Arjun Bhuprani pointed out that they don't exist. That was his hot take. So yeah, that's something I'll look into further, and maybe this article will be readjusted.
Yeah, and if you're watching this on YouTube, you can check out our little graphic right here. It's a great article. You should check it out. Okay, moving on with this section of the pod. Another recommended read, but this is actually a watch, is shout out to Arjun Patani actually, because he was on this pod, Bridging and its benefits with Nomad and Connext. Great episode. You should definitely watch our show first, then their show. Anyways, yeah. And then lastly, actually, Arjun, it's your turn to talk. Sorry, I get so excited talking about everything.
I mean, yeah, so there was a post-mortem by the Ronin team about like back to building and the security breach post-mortem. So they basically talk about like how the attack happened and what has happened since then. And more importantly, they talk about their security roadmap, where they talk about audits and working with different top tier security experts. Interestingly, like we discussed, there's no change in their validator based bridge design. So instead of like going down a different bridge design, they've decided to increase the number of validators. So initially, before the attack, it was 9. They've increased this to 11, and they're in the process of like onboarding 3 more validators. And basically, they have a target of reaching a number of 21 validators by the end of 3 months. And in the long term, they want to have 100 validators. So instead of like changing the bridge design itself, they've decided to add more validators to the system, which is an interesting approach because there are so many different designs out there right now that you can just play around, I would say. But yeah, it's their decision, and they've decided to go down this route. And they also talk about the hackers and how the FBI has pointed out that the Lazarus group from North Korea is behind this. And I know, Mark, you have some strong opinions on nation states in blockchain. So what do you think about this?
So first of all, I think this shows that crypto has a validator issue. The fact that Ronin can't just find 100 people to onboard onto their validator network quickly and in kind of a trusted manner. I don't want to use that word in this context, but I think you understand what I'm saying. Kind of makes me sad. It's like we're building these distributed systems, but we don't have enough validators to actually secure them properly. To me, bumping up from 9 to 11 is good, right? I'm glad that they're bumping it up, but like 11 is still a very small number.
I mean, again, it's that question like, how decentralized is decentralized enough, right?
Correct. So I'll stay away from that. You go read Arjun's article, and then you can form your own opinions on what is trusted or trustless. As for the North Korea aspect of this story, I am just endlessly intrigued. Okay. On one hand, it's like kind of crazy that a nation state is attacking crypto bridges. Like, does that mean that crypto is here to stay? Or does that mean that crypto is like this terribly built structure that, these bad entities are going to attack and then it's going to go to zero? Like, I don't know, but it fries my brain and I love it. Love thinking about it. I also love the fact that the US government can be like, oh my gosh, look, we track these transactions on the public immutable like ledger. And look, that was North Korea that did this, guys. And they found that out, in like less than a month. So those are my thoughts. I think
I
it's
mean,
a
for
crazy
anyone
story.
who thought they could just do away with taxes by not showing it because they're on the blockchain and like on dexes, this is a great example that you can't, right? So if the government comes after you, they can and like find whatever wallet you're using, whatever transactions you have. So it's on the government to, if they want to, they can. But as a good citizen, you should file your own taxes properly.
For sure. And I think with that, we're back to the last part of the podcast,
Yeah, so I
which,
mean, there's another recommended read, which is about
oh,
the security assumptions and potential concerns with Stargate.
sorry, I didn't click that one. My bad. I'll
Yeah,
scroll
so
down.
it's basically about like, obviously this is not to fight any project, but it is just good to see people talking openly about bridge security and also educating others on Twitter. And this is like good feedback for the team, because if there are really any concerns, they can just go and fix the problem. So yeah, it's like a great insight into how to evaluate bridge security as well. So definitely, it's kind of technical for anyone interested, but it's definitely worth a read.
Okay, Arjun, we have like 5 minutes left. What's on your cross-chain mind this week?
I mean, I can't look past the optimistic design actually working in practice, right? So what's interesting for me is there are all these different bridges that are currently being developed. Like I think Philip, one of our founders, he tweeted that he talked to 20 different bridges, 10 or 20. And what was more interesting was none of them were taking the like trust minimize approach to this. So there's so much space in the like design space to work around with. It'll be interesting to see if the new bridges they see this as an example and they want a trusted solution that serves the purpose. That's also good, but like it'll be interesting to see which side of the spectrum these bridges fall into.
Yeah. Okay, so my cross-chain thoughts, you're always so sophisticated. I'm just a degenerate. But my eyes were all over the Otherdeed NFT drop this week, which went down this week. I think over $150 million worth of Ethereum was burned during the mint. And I saw like Twitter was aghast at the drop, and a lot of the reasons was there were rumors that the smart contract was not optimized. And, then Yuga Labs came out and hinted that they were going to build their own chain to move over their metaverse other side ecosystem too. And people were like, oh, they purposely didn't optimize the contract, yada, yada, yada. For those who are conspiracy theorists, I would say that Vitalik came out and kind of backed up Yuga Labs and said their smart contract looked okay. So look, anything Vitalik says, I usually tend to believe rather than just the random Anon threadors who want to blame Yuga for not having an optimized contract. But I'm going to stay away from it because I have not looked down at the contract in like detail. I've just kind of glanced over it. Anyways, what I'm super interested about is whether Yuga Labs, if they would have done this Otherdeed drop on an L2, if an L2 would have been able to handle that type of intensity. Because I mean, this would have been like the biggest stress test ever for Optimism, Arbitrum, Polygon, anything. And gosh, I just like, I'm fascinated by it. And I really do hope that they either build their own chain or try to do their next drop on an L2, because I don't think an L2 has been tested in a way where we know that it's ready to go. And I think that Bored Ape Yacht Club is like the first thing that could do that.
Yeah, I think Polygon has still been like battle tested in that sense because there are so many games that were launching. There was that Sunflower game as well. So they've kind of had experience with this kind of launches. But yes, none of the L2s have been like battle tested as Ethereum has been, right? So it'll be interesting to see which route they take. Like, do they create their own chain? But then they have to take care of the security. They have to pay for all that. And if they just create a roll up or like an L2, they can pay Ethereum for that security and use it. So
I'm definitely rooting for a roll up if they do so. I will say that ApeCoin is now live on Polygon. I believe that news came out after the newsletter dropped, which is pretty interesting. And then the last thing I'll say about this is that I think Ethereum did a pretty good job. I mean, yes, gas fees soared, but like that's what's supposed to happen when there's crazy demand. The network did not break; it bent. There was no rollback. There was no 7-hour shutdown. And so I think it was a pretty staunch showing by Ethereum. Those are my final thoughts. All right. So I guess that's the end of the show. We did a good job. We kept it tight this week.